She had always lived in the background. People often spoke over her, ignored her presence, or assumed she was incapable of more than the simplest tasks. At work, she was given jobs that others considered easy, jobs that required little thought or creativity. Her colleagues rarely looked at her for guidance. Her supervisors assigned her the tasks they thought she could handle without much effort. Even friends and acquaintances often underestimated her, assuming she would never do anything extraordinary. She could feel it, the way their eyes slid over her, how their voices carried a hint of doubt whenever they spoke to her. Yet, she didn't mind. She had learned early that life often judged people too quickly, and that expectations could be limiting if one allowed them to be at home. She lived a quiet life, filled with small routines that seemed ordinary to anyone watching. She made her bed every morning, prepared meals, took care of errands, and maintained her small apartment meticulously. Neighbors might have called her routine dull, but she found comfort in the consistency of it. She took pride in small things that others overlooked. A perfectly folded towel, a plant thriving in a sunny window, a handwritten note left for a friend. These were her small victories, unnoticed by most, but they mattered to her. She had learned to find joy in simple acts, even when the world assumed her life would remain ordinary at work. The assignments she received were basic, but she approached each with care. She believed that even simple tasks could be done well if approached with attention and effort. While others might rush through, she would quietly take time to ensure nothing was overlooked. She became known as reliable, the person who never caused problems, but no one expected her to do anything beyond that. Sometimes she caught glimpses of how people were treated when they produced something remarkable. There was admiration, praise, maybe even envy. She observed it silently, thinking that one day she too could create work that would earn such acknowledgement. But she kept it as a quiet dream, hidden from those who doubted her. Every day, she moved through her life with a sense of calm awareness. She noticed the way her colleagues spoke to each other, how their gestures and words revealed who they truly trusted and valued. She noticed the small cracks in projects, the overlooked details, and the areas where others were careless. She didn't point these out publicly, for she had learned that speaking up often invited ridicule if one was underestimated. Instead, she stored that knowledge, quietly thinking of how she could make a difference if given the chance. She was patient, knowing that opportunities would not arrive in grand announcements but through steady persistence. People often tried to give her advice that she didn't need. Keep it simple, they would say, as if complexity or excellence were beyond her reach. Some would even laugh at the idea of her attempting something ambitious. Their tone was never mean-spirited, but it carried the weight of assumption. They assumed her limitations, and for a moment she felt the familiar twinge of doubt that always threatened to creep in. But she had learned to meet doubt with quiet determination. She reminded herself that the opinions of others were not her truth. She had her own measures of success, her own standards, and her own belief that ordinary beginnings could lead to extraordinary results. Her friends and family, while supportive in their way, often failed to see the depth of her capabilities. They spoke with affection, but in ways that subtly reinforced the idea that she was average, that she was someone who did not need to reach beyond what was easy and safe. Invitations to events or discussions sometimes skipped her, not out of malice, but out of habit. She noticed the pattern, yet she did not let it define her. She quietly strengthened her skills, nurtured her creativity, and built her understanding of the world. She read books, studied different methods of work, learned from mistakes, and applied lessons in small, unnoticeable ways. Every day she was growing, though no one around her realized it. One morning she arrived at work with a sense of normalcy. The office hummed with its usual chatter, people hurrying to meetings, discussing projects, making plans. She walked to her desk, greeted a few colleagues with a nod, and opened her computer. Her task for the day was one she had done many times before, something simple and repetitive. Yet, as she began, she noticed ways to make it better, ways to improve the process, even within the confines of simplicity. She quietly adjusted, refined, and organized. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed the subtle improvements, but most people never looked that closely. That was fine with her. She worked for the sake of excellence, not recognition. She often reflected on why people underestimated her. She thought about her appearance, her quiet demeanor, her willingness to do what was asked without complaint. She understood that people often confuse modesty and calm confidence with lack of ability. She knew that her strength lay in her patience, her attention to detail, and her ability to see beyond the surface. While others sought immediate results or flashy achievements, she believed in depth, in building strong foundations, and in preparing herself for moments that truly mattered. In her mind, the ordinary was never a limitation, but a canvas for something extraordinary. Outside work, she engaged in small acts that nurtured her sense of purpose. She volunteered quietly in her community, helped friends solve problems, and maintained habits that enriched her mind and body. These were not acts meant to impress anyone, but to cultivate resilience, skill, and understanding. Her life was quietly productive, full of lessons that would later serve her in ways no one could anticipate. She began to see patterns in how the world underestimated people, and how those assumptions often became a person's secret advantage. If no one expected much, there was freedom to exceed expectations without immediate scrutiny. Her colleagues continued their routines, unaware of the quiet force working alongside them. Meetings went on, deadlines approached, and projects moved forward. She participated without seeking attention, offering insights only when necessary and remaining mostly unnoticed. Yet her mind was active, considering possibilities, planning ways to refine tasks, and thinking about future opportunities where she could make a significant impact. She knew that moments of greatness often began with the unnoticed steps, the small, deliberate efforts taken in private. Even in moments of discouragement, she found strength in her vision. Sometimes people would speak lightly about her limitations, make jokes, or question her abilities. On some days, the weight of years of underestimation pressed on her. But she reminded herself that the judgments of others were not absolute. She had seen examples in life where people rose beyond what anyone thought possible. She held on to the belief that extraordinary work was possible, even for those who had always been overlooked. Her awareness of being underestimated did not make her bitter. Instead, it sharpened her focus. She began to see the patterns of how expectations were set, how people judged without full understanding, and how those judgments could be used as motivation. She observed who trusted her, who ignored her, and who doubted her, learning from each interaction. Slowly, she built a quiet confidence, one that was rooted not in external approval, but in her own understanding of her abilities. Days passed in similar fashion, but each day added to her preparation. She refined skills, learned nuances of her work, and grew comfortable with patience. She developed an ability to notice what others overlooked, to think ahead, and to see the consequences of small decisions. Her mind became a tool of careful observation and thoughtful planning. She had not yet revealed her true potential, but she was readying herself for the moment when she could do so. She understood that life often gave small tasks to those who were underestimated, perhaps as a test, perhaps as a way to see who would rise to the occasion. She embraced each assignment, no matter how mundane, knowing it was part of a larger process. While others rushed to show off talent, she focused on mastering the fundamentals. The simplicity of her assignments became a space to innovate quietly, to improve processes subtly, and to develop habits that would allow her to shine when the right moment came. Her colleagues continued their chatter. Often unaware of her internal world, they assumed she would follow their pace, accept their limitations, and never challenge the ordinary. She'll let them assume. Their assumptions gave her freedom to prepare, to experiment quietly, and to grow without pressure. She knew that the true measure of her ability would come not from their expectations, but from the results. She would eventually deliver. And so she waited, patient, determined, and ready. She often reflected on stories she had read or witnessed of ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things. She drew inspiration from their journeys, noting the similarities in being underestimated, in facing doubt, and in working quietly toward greatness. These stories reinforced her belief that what was simple on the surface could contain extraordinary potential if nurtured with care, attention, and persistence. She carried this belief, as a quiet flame, one that guided her through repetitive tasks, unnoticed by others but burning steadily within her. People may have continued to underestimate her, but she had already made a decision. She would not be defined by their assumptions. She would not rush, she would not boast, and she would not seek immediate recognition. She would prepare, observe, and cultivate her abilities. She would wait for the moment when she could take what was expected to be simple and transform it into something remarkable. And in that quiet preparation, she found not frustration, but a sense of purpose and anticipation. The world might not yet see it, but she was ready to show them what was possible when ordinary effort met extraordinary intention. She felt the weight of expectation more clearly that morning than ever before. A new project had arrived on her desk, one that others described as simple, straightforward, and almost trivial. Her supervisor smiled politely, handing it over with a few words. "Keep it simple," they said, as if any more would be too much for her. The words stung slightly, though she kept her face calm. She had heard them many times before, yet somehow, each repetition reminded her that the world often failed to see her abilities. She took a deep breath and began. The task was basic. But as she read through the instructions, she noticed details that were unclear or incomplete. Others might have shrugged and followed the instructions blindly. She considered the possible outcomes, thought about the implications of each step, and began to make notes. There was a quiet thrill in realizing that she could see what others did not. She worked carefully, organizing her thoughts and mapping out a plan that ensured the task would be done not just correctly but efficiently and thoroughly. She worked quietly, almost invisibly, as if the world had paused and left her alone with her ideas. Around her, colleagues chatted and moved about, unaware of the careful planning unfolding. They were caught up in their own work, thinking themselves busy and productive. Some glanced at her occasionally with polite curiosity, but quickly returned to their tasks. She knew they assumed she would do the minimum, the simplest solution. That assumption was exactly what allowed her to prepare in peace. She did not rush to prove herself. She did not announce her intentions. She simply worked, quietly and methodically, shaping her approach with precision. Despite her calm exterior, a small voice of doubt sometimes crept in. Years of being underestimated had left their mark, and at moments she questioned whether her ideas were worth the effort. Would anyone even notice the extra care she was taking? Would her work ever matter beyond the obvious completion of a simple task? She acknowledged the doubt, but did not allow it to control her. She had learned that the opinions of others were fleeting and often shallow. While the effort she invested would carry its own weight, she leaned on that understanding and continued. Her hands moving steadily over the work before her, she began to see possibilities others would never consider. Small adjustments here, slight improvements there. Even minor changes in organization that made the task more meaningful and effective. She imagined how the work would be received, not by those who underestimated her, but by those who would later see the impact of her effort. She imagined the surprise in their faces, the realization that what they assumed would be ordinary could in fact be remarkable. The thought gave her a quiet energy, one that propelled her forward with focus and patience. Hours passed as she worked, though it did not feel like time. She paused occasionally to review, to make sure that her approach was sound, that she had not missed any detail. She cross-checked information, anticipated potential issues, and adjusted her plans accordingly. Each small decision was made with care. She did not need applause or recognition. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she was preparing something that mattered. Even a simple task could carry weight if approached with intention. Her colleagues occasionally checked in, asking questions or offering suggestions. Some of these were dismissive, others genuinely curious. She listened politely, weighing their input, but remained true to her plan. She had learned long ago that too much external interference often diluted the quality of work. She had her own standards, her own vision, and she trusted them. Slowly, her project began to take shape, revealing layers of thought and care that went far beyond the original instructions. By mid-afternoon, she realized the task could be transformed into something truly effective. She started exploring ways to enhance its value. adding thoughtful touches that made the work clearer, more accessible, and more impactful. She considered the end user, the audience who would interact with it, and adjusted every element with care. What was expected to be simple now carried the seeds of extraordinary attention. She felt a quiet thrill in this realization, knowing she was stepping beyond the boundaries others had set for her. Even as she worked, there were moments of tension. Some colleagues whispered doubts or comments that reached her ears. "Are you sure she can handle that?" one asked. "It's really nothing complicated. She should be fine," another replied. They assumed the simplicity of the task equated to her ability. She heard them, but she let it roll off, like water on stone. Their limited view of her capabilities had never defined her, and it would not define her now. She focused on what she could control: her effort, her thoughtfulness, her preparation. The office clock ticked steadily, marking time that she barely noticed. Outside, the sun moved across the sky, unnoticed in her concentration. She organized files, checked details, made connections between elements that others had not considered. She created contingency plans, anticipating questions and challenges that might arise once the work was reviewed. Her mind worked methodically, like a quiet engine, producing thoughtful solutions with precision and care. At moments, she looked up and noticed her colleagues, busy in their own routines. Unaware of the transformation occurring on her desk, they assumed she was simply completing a simple task, not realizing that every action she took carried purpose and foresight. That invisibility, which might have frustrated someone else, was a gift to her. She moved forward without distraction, guided by her understanding that great results often emerged from unnoticed effort. The task demanded patience, and she gave it generously. She revised her work multiple times, improving clarity, correcting minor errors, and ensuring that the final product would exceed expectations. Each revision brought subtle enhancements, refinements that might not be immediately visible, but would create a lasting impression. She knew that excellence often lay in details that were not obvious to those who only skimmed the UA. Surface, her focus was so intense that lunchtime passed unnoticed. She worked quietly, sipping a cup of tea, her mind fully engaged. Every choice she made reflected careful thought. She imagined how the final product would be received, envisioning the reactions of those who had doubted her. She did not rush the process, knowing that thoughtful preparation was more valuable than quick completion. Even in the simplicity of the task, she found opportunities to elevate it. By late afternoon, the project had transformed from a simple assignment into a work of care, precision, and subtle innovation. She reviewed every element one last time, satisfied that she had done more than what was asked. She knew it would stand out not because she had sought attention, but because it carried integrity and thoughtfulness. This was her way: silent effort, careful planning, and quiet excellence. When she finally submitted the work, she felt a mix of anticipation and calm confidence. She did not expect immediate praise. She understood that recognition often lagged behind results. She knew, however, that the true measure of her work would soon be seen, and when it was, the ordinary task would be revealed as something extraordinary. In that moment, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. Not over others, but over the limitations that had been placed on her and over the doubts she sometimes felt within herself as she stepped back from her desk. She reflected on the process. The task had seemed simple at first, but she had turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. She realized that being underestimated was not a disadvantage, but a chance to exceed expectations. Without pressure or distraction, the world might have assumed she could only do simple work. But she had quietly shown that simplicity could carry extraordinary depth when approached with care, focus, and intention. Her day ended quietly. She left the office, carrying with her the satisfaction of work done well and the anticipation of what was to come. She knew that her effort would not go unnoticed forever, and that this was only one step in a journey where being underestimated would continue to provide opportunities. With each simple task she transformed, she was quietly preparing for moments where her true capabilities could shine. And though others still saw her as ordinary, she had learned that extraordinary results often begin with the smallest, most unnoticed efforts. She continued her work with quiet determination, knowing that no one was truly watching. While others sought recognition or approval, she worked in silence, trusting that the results would speak for themselves. Each day brought small challenges, little decisions that could affect the final outcome. She treated every detail with care, understanding that excellence was not found in shortcuts, but in attention to the smallest aspects of her work. The office around her buzzed with ordinary activity. Colleagues walked past, exchanged casual greetings, and discussed their own tasks. Some assumed she was handling her responsibilities as usual, keeping things simple and routine. They did not see the careful thought she put into every step, the quiet problem-solving that occurred behind her calm demeanor. She preferred it this way. The lack of observation gave her freedom to focus fully, without the distraction of outside expectations or judgments. As the days went on, she noticed problems that others ignored. Small inefficiencies, overlooked details, and inconsistencies that would later cause complications. Instead of pointing them out loudly, she took responsibility quietly, correcting the issues, planning solutions, and integrating improvements seamlessly into her work. Each adjustment made the overall project stronger and more effective. Though it remained invisible to those who assumed the work would be simple, she knew that the best accomplishments often went unnoticed until the right moment. She also started thinking ahead. Beyond the immediate task, she considered how her work might be used or interpreted. She imagined the perspectives of different people who would interact with it, and she made adjustments accordingly. This foresight became part of her process. Others might only consider the steps they were instructed to take, but she saw the bigger picture. Every choice she made was guided by careful thought and understanding, creating a project that was not only complete but thoughtfully crafted for maximum clarity and impact. Her routine was methodical. She began each morning reviewing her notes from the previous day, reminding herself of progress made in areas still to refine. She maintained a quiet sense of discipline, resisting distractions and staying focused on the details that mattered. She had learned that patience was as important as skill, and that excellence required steady effort over time. She didn't need anyone to notice her diligence. The results would eventually reveal the depth of her work. Occasionally, she faced moments of doubt. Questions would creep in. Would her efforts be appreciated? Would people finally see her abilities, or would they continue to underestimate her? She acknowledged these feelings without letting them interfere with her focus. Doubt, she realized, was a natural part of striving for something beyond expectation. It was a test of resilience, a moment to reaffirm her commitment to doing things well, regardless of external validation. During these quiet hours, she discovered a rhythm in her work. There was satisfaction in observing small improvements, correcting subtle errors, and seeing the pieces come together. Each day added depth to her understanding of the project, revealing connections and insights she had not noticed initially. This process was as rewarding as the final result, teaching her patience, observation, and the value of careful planning. She often reflected on her past experiences of being underestimated. Memories of colleagues dismissing her ideas, friends overlooking her suggestions, those supervisors assigning her only basic tasks surfaced. She no longer allowed these experiences to frustrate her. Instead, she used them as fuel. Each small act of careful attention became a quiet rebellion against the limitations others had placed on her. She was proving first to herself and then to the world that capability could exist quietly, unseen. Until the right moment, as she worked, she began to refine not just the task itself, but her approach to the work. She developed strategies for efficiency, methods for organizing information, and techniques for anticipating challenges. She documented these methods privately, understanding that they would serve her well in the future. By doing so, she created a foundation for consistent excellence. The skills she honed were not flashy, but they were reliable, sustainable, and ultimately transformative. Her colleagues continued their routines, some noticing small improvements without realizing their source. Comments like "this seems smoother than usual," or "things are falling into place nicely," reached her ears, but she did not react. These subtle acknowledgments confirmed that her efforts were effective, though the full extent remained unrecognized. She knew that recognition would come in its own time. Once the final product was revealed and she was content to wait, she also practiced restraint. While she noticed inefficiencies and potential improvements in the work of others, she intervened only when necessary. She understood the balance between helping and overstepping. By acting selectively, she avoided drawing unnecessary attention to herself, allowing her contributions to remain quiet yet powerful. This discipline became a hallmark of her approach, one that emphasized substance over visibility. Throughout this period, she remained deeply human in her perspective. She was not motivated solely by achievement. She cared about the impact of her work on real people. She considered the experience of those who would interact with her work, striving to make it clear, helpful, and meaningful. This human-centric focus gave her a sense of purpose, reminding her that her effort was not just about personal accomplishment, but about contributing something valuable to others. Her personal life mirrored the quiet diligence of her work. She maintained routines that supported her focus and well-being. Early mornings, healthy meals, walks for reflection, and evenings of reading or journaling. She nurtured her mind and body, understanding that the ability to perform at her best depended on holistic care. These habits, often unnoticed by those around her, strengthened her capacity to tackle challenges with clarity and energy. Even as the project progressed, she encountered moments where others' assumptions threatened to influence her. A colleague might casually suggest taking the simple route, implying she should avoid extra effort. In such moments, she smiled politely but stayed true to her methodical approach. She had learned to respect the expectations of others without allowing them to define her. The contrast between their assumptions and her own intentions fueled her determination to exceed the ordinary. As days turned into a week, the work began to reach a point of readiness. The quiet effort, careful revisions, and thoughtful enhancements were culminating in a product far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Each decision she had made, each small adjustment, was adding up to a final result that would surprise those who had doubted her. She felt a growing sense of anticipation, a quiet confidence that what had been expected to be simple would reveal itself as exceptional. She reviewed her work one last time before preparing it for presentation. Attention to detail, clarity, and thoughtful organization were evident in every element. She ensured that the final version was both practical and meaningful, meeting all requirements while exceeding the ordinary standards set for the task. It was a culmination of silent effort, careful thought, human-centered focus. When she finally stepped back, she felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond pride. She had transformed the simple into something extraordinary without seeking recognition, without boasting, and without the need for immediate approval. Her process had been quiet, disciplined, and deeply intentional. The task, which others expected to be routine, had become a reflection of her capability, patience, and insight as she looked around the office. She noticed the same activity she had seen before: colleagues focused on their work, supervisors busy with schedules, life moving forward in its usual rhythm. They had no idea of the depth of preparation, observation, and care that had gone into what they assumed was simple. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She preferred her impact to be measured by results rather than perception, by substance rather than visibility. Her journey in this phase of the project taught her more than technical skills. It reinforced her understanding of patience, self-discipline, observation, and quiet resilience. She learned that extraordinary work often begins in obscurity, that being underestimated can provide freedom to innovate, and that the value of effort is not always immediately visible. These lessons became part of her approach, shaping not only her work, but her perspective on challenges, expectations, and personal growth. She finished the day with a sense of calm and anticipation. The quiet effort behind the scenes had prepared her for the moment when the work would be revealed. She understood that recognition, admiration, and acknowledgement would come in due course, but her focus remained on excellence and integrity rather than external validation. She left the office with the quiet knowledge that her careful work had planted the seeds for extraordinary results, waiting only for the right moment to bloom. The day had finally arrived when her work would be shared with others. She felt a quiet anticipation, a sense of calm confidence that the careful preparation, patience, and attention to detail would now speak for themselves. She knew that what had been expected to be simple would soon reveal its true depth. The ordinary instructions she had received had been transformed into something that reflected thoughtfulness, foresight, and skill. As her colleagues gathered for the presentation or review, she noticed subtle shifts in their expressions. Some looked bored, expecting another routine submission. Others glanced at her with polite curiosity, still unsure what to anticipate. She remained composed, aware that the moment of revelation would speak louder than any words she could offer. She had prepared not for recognition, but for the satisfaction of knowing her work was done well. When she presented the task, her colleagues began to notice details that they had overlooked before. The clarity of her organization, the careful structure, and the subtle enhancements were immediately evident. What had been a simple assignment now had layers of thought that made it easier to understand. It's more efficient to use and more impactful than anyone expected. Conversations in the room shifted as people recognized the depth of her effort. Some colleagues were genuinely surprised. They had assumed the project would be simple, perhaps even rushed, but the result was meticulous and well-constructed. Small improvements that seemed almost invisible at first glance added significant value to the overall work. People began to ask questions, to probe the reasoning behind certain choices, and to comment on the effectiveness of her approach. She answered calmly, providing insights without seeking to dominate the conversation, letting the work itself illustrate her capabilities. Her supervisor, who had instructed her to keep the project simple, was visibly impressed. The careful thought, the problem-solving foresight, and the attention to detail exceeded expectations. They asked questions, explored her process, and seemed to realize for the first time the depth of her abilities. It was a moment of quiet satisfaction for her. She had not sought to impress, yet the results spoke more powerfully than any words could. Throughout the room, a sense of admiration began to grow. Colleagues who had doubted her, who had assumed she would produce only basic results, started to see her differently. They recognized not just the quality of the work, but the patience, insight, and effort that had gone into creating it. The simple had become extraordinary. The people around her were beginning to understand that assumptions about her abilities had been mistaken. She noticed a few subtle reactions, raised eyebrows, whispered comments, smiles of appreciation. These were small, but they mattered. They signaled that her work was no longer invisible. It was being recognized for the value she had always known it possessed. She did not feel the need to boast or draw attention to herself. The acknowledgement of her colleagues was enough, and the deeper satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had fulfilled her own standards of excellence. As discussions continued, some colleagues began to reference her methods in other areas of work. They asked for her approach, wanting to understand how she had managed to transform a simple task into something so effective. She shared her insights with humility, explaining the process without claiming superiority. The focus remained on the work itself, not on personal accolades, and this further enhanced her credibility. People started to see her as someone capable of thoughtful, high-quality work, someone whose skills could be applied beyond the ordinary assignments she had been given. The moment also brought a reflection on past assumptions. Those who had underestimated her now realized that their expectations had been too limited. The recognition was not immediate for every person in the room, but the impact was clear. She had demonstrated that excellence often comes quietly, through persistence and careful effort, and that being underestimated can provide the space to develop skills and insights without pressure or interference. She observed the reactions without letting them distract her. The satisfaction came from the work itself. The quiet confirmation that her effort had produced results beyond what was anticipated. She saw that even those who were initially skeptical could not deny the quality and effectiveness of her contribution. The room buzzed with discussions, questions, and recognition, and she remained poised, allowing the work to shine rather than her words. Some colleagues started to reflect on their own practices. Noticing that they had rushed through similar tasks or overlooked details, her work had not only exceeded expectations, but had inspired others to think differently, to approach their own responsibilities with more care and attention. This ripple effect, subtle as it was, gave her a sense of fulfillment that went beyond personal recognition. She realized that extraordinary effort can influence others quietly, setting standards without overt assertion. She also noticed the human element in the reactions. Some people expressed genuine curiosity, asking how she had anticipated certain issues or why she had chosen specific methods. Others expressed relief that the project had been completed effectively, avoiding problems that might have arisen if it had been treated casually. She felt a sense of connection to the people affected by her work, knowing that her efforts had made their tasks easier and more productive. This human-centered perspective was as important to her as the technical success of the project. Throughout the day, feedback continued to come in. Positive remarks, questions, and expressions of appreciation slowly accumulated. Painting a picture of the impact of her work, she accepted these responses gracefully, understanding that recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the intrinsic satisfaction of producing meaningful work. She had learned long ago that true accomplishment comes from dedication, persistence, and attention to detail, not from external validation alone. As the day drew to a close, she reflected on the transformation that had taken place. A simple assignment, given with the expectation of basic completion, had become a testament to her patience, foresight, and skill. The ordinary task had been elevated to something extraordinary through quiet effort, careful planning, and human-centered consideration. She understood that the perception of others had shifted, not because she demanded acknowledgement, but because the work itself demonstrated her capabilities. This moment also reinforced her understanding of patience and timing. She realized that extraordinary work does not always require a grand announcement or public display. Often, it emerges quietly, nurtured by persistence and thoughtful effort until the right moment reveals its impact. Being underestimated, she recognized, had provided her with a unique advantage of space to prepare, refine, and innovate without distraction or pressure. She left the office that evening with a sense of calm achievement. The reactions of her colleagues, the recognition from her supervisor, and the subtle changes in perception around her were all tangible outcomes of the work she had completed. Yet, her satisfaction remained rooted in the intrinsic value of the effort itself. She had delivered extraordinary results not by seeking attention but by embracing quiet diligence, careful thought, and human-focused consideration. On her way home, she thought about the lessons embedded in this experience. She considered the power of patience, the importance of observing and understanding details, the value of preparing thoroughly, even when expectations were low. She reflected on the human elements, the responses of those affected, the influence her work had on others, and the quiet shifts in perception that recognition brings. She understood that true impact is often subtle, cumulative, and enduring at home. She allowed herself a moment of reflection and satisfaction. She knew that her journey was not complete, that future challenges would require similar care, attention, and resilience. But she also recognized that this moment marked a turning point, demonstration of what was possible when simplicity was approached with extraordinary intention. The experience had strengthened her confidence, validated her methods, and provided a quiet affirmation that excellence is achievable regardless of how others perceive one's capabilities. As night fell, she prepared for the next day, carrying with her the knowledge that the ordinary could always be transformed into the extraordinary with patience, insight, and care. She felt ready for future tasks, knowing that her approach, silent, thoughtful, and human-centered, would continue to produce results that exceeded expectations. The recognition she had received was gratifying, but the deeper satisfaction came from the understanding that her abilities had been proven in the most meaningful way, through action, not assertion, through results, not promises, and through the transformation of simple tasks into extraordinary achievements in the days that followed. The impact of her work continued to unfold. The simple tasks she had been given, expected to meet only the basic requirements, had now become a reference point in her workplace. Colleagues began to approach her with questions, seeking her insights on projects that they once assumed were beyond her capability. She responded patiently, explaining her process and reasoning without any sense of superiority. Her focus remained on helping others understand rather than proving herself. In doing so, she earned respect, not through force or boast, but through consistent demonstration of skill and thoughtfulness. People began to notice patterns in the way she approached work. Her careful planning, attention to detail, and ability to anticipate potential challenges became evident. Others saw that she did not simply complete tasks. She transformed them into meaningful, functional, and thoughtful results. It became clear that her contributions were not occasional flashes of brilliance, but a reflection of consistent dedication and deliberate effort. This realization shifted perceptions, and those who had underestimated her started to reconsider their assumptions.